The courtroom was silent except for my husband's laughter. After 24 years of marriage, he leaned back in his expensive suit and smirked as if he'd already won everything. "You'll leave here with nothing," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. His girlfriend laughed beside him while my lawyer quietly slid a sealed letter across the judge's desk. The judge unfolded it, read the first few lines, then stopped. His eyebrows lifted. Seconds later, he chuckled, looked directly at my husband, and calmly said, "Mr. Carter, I think you're about to regret everything you just said." Suddenly, nobody was smiling anymore. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 47 years old. If someone had asked me a year ago whether I trusted my husband, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second. After 24 years of marriage, trust wasn't something I questioned. It was simply the air we breathed. Daniel and I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, successful careers, weekend dinner parties, vacation photos smiling from every wall. People constantly told us we were the couple everyone admired. I believed them. When Daniel started his construction company 20 years earlier, we had almost nothing. I worked full-time as a financial coordinator while handling every bill, every grocery trip, every late-night emergency that came with building a family. There were years when I skipped promotions because his business needed me available at home. I never complained. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in our future, not his. Eventually, the business exploded. New offices, luxury clients, magazine interviews, expensive suits replaced discount store jackets, and business-class flights replaced long road trips. I was genuinely proud every time I saw his picture in another article. Whenever people congratulated him, he always smiled and said, "I couldn't have done any of it without Emily." I believed that too. Then something changed. At first, it was so small I convinced myself I was imagining it. Business dinners became overnight conferences. Weekend meetings appeared without warning. His phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter, suddenly never left his pocket. Whenever it buzzed, he'd turn the screen away before reading it. I noticed. But love has an incredible way of making excuses. He's stressed. Business is growing. I'm overthinking. That's what I kept telling myself. One Friday evening, I planned a surprise dinner at his favorite steakhouse. I even wore the blue dress he once told me made me look 25 again. I arrived early and waited near the entrance. Then I saw him. Daniel walked through the lobby laughing. He wasn't alone. A younger woman walked beside him, resting her hand comfortably on his arm. They weren't looking around to see who might recognize them. They looked comfortable, familiar, like two people who had stopped pretending a long time ago. Before I could move, she reached up and straightened his tie. Then he kissed her forehead. Not passionately, not secretly, tenderly, like a husband greeting the woman he loved. My heart didn't shatter. It simply went silent. I left before either of them noticed me, drove home in complete silence, and sat alone in my driveway for nearly an hour. That night, Daniel walked through our front door carrying flowers. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and apologized for another exhausting business meeting. I smiled back. For the first time in 24 years, I knew my husband was lying. And deep down, I had the terrifying feeling that this betrayal had been planned long before I ever discovered it. The next morning, I didn't confront Daniel. I made his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars. A splash of cream. I kissed him goodbye as he walked out the front door, just as I had every weekday for nearly a quarter of a century. He smiled without hesitation. Watching him drive away, I realized something painful. The man who lied so effortlessly had rehearsed this long before I caught him. Instead of crying, I opened my laptop. Daniel always believed I wasn't interested in the financial side of his company anymore. Years earlier, I'd stepped back to let him run the business his way. What he'd forgotten was that numbers had always been my language. The first few hours revealed nothing unusual. Then I noticed several transfers from our joint investment account into an unfamiliar business account. The amounts weren't enormous individually, but together they added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over 18 months. Every transfer carried vague descriptions: consulting, development, Corporate expansion. Too vague. Too convenient. I quietly downloaded every statement before he could remove anything. Then I searched through our shared cloud storage. Most folders contained ordinary tax records and insurance documents. One folder required a password. Daniel had always used birthdays or anniversaries for passwords. This one wasn't different. Our wedding date opened it instantly. Inside were scanned property documents for a luxury condominium downtown. Only one name appeared on the purchase agreement. Not Daniel's. The owner's name belonged to the same woman I'd seen outside the steakhouse. My stomach tightened. Attached to the purchase file was a chain of emails between them. At first they discussed furniture, decorating, and moving schedules. Then the messages became personal. We're almost there. She still doesn't suspect anything. By the time the divorce is final, everything important will already be protected. I stopped reading for several minutes. Not because I couldn't continue, because I suddenly couldn't breathe. When I finally opened the next email, I wished I hadn't. It contained a spreadsheet labeled post-divorce financial plan. Every asset we owned had been listed. Our house, retirement accounts, investments, savings. Beside each item were detailed notes explaining how Daniel intended to keep as much as possible while leaving me with the smallest legal settlement he thought he could justify. One sentence hurt more than everything else. Emily trusts paperwork about as much as she trusts me. She'll never see this coming. I quietly printed every document, every email, every spreadsheet, every transfer record. Then I placed them inside a plain brown folder. That afternoon, I scheduled a confidential meeting with one of the most respected family law attorneys in the city. After nearly 2 hours of reviewing everything, she leaned back in her chair and smiled for the first time. "Emily," she said calmly, "your husband believes he's playing chess while you're still learning the rules. So, what do? You stay exactly as calm as you've been today." She closed the folder, tapped it gently, then slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. "I also want you to write a personal letter to the judge." "A letter?" She nodded. "Not for sympathy." She smiled again. "For context." Then she looked directly into my eyes and quietly added, "If the judge reads that letter alongside this evidence, your husband is going to have a very bad day." The divorce hearing arrived 3 weeks later. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was afraid of losing. Because I finally understood that no courtroom could ever return the 24 years I'd invested in someone who had already decided to replace me. When I walked into the courthouse that morning, Daniel was already there. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored. His confidence filled the hallway before he even spoke. Standing beside him was the same woman from the steakhouse. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress and smiled as though she had already stepped into the life that used to belong to me. Daniel caught my eye and smirked. "I hope you're ready," he said loudly. "This won't take long." I didn't answer. My attorney simply nodded toward the courtroom doors. "Stay calm," she whispered. "Remember the plan." Inside, everyone took their places. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Daniel's attorney spoke first. For nearly 20 minutes, he painted a picture of a hard-working businessman whose success had supposedly been built through his own determination. Then he described me as someone who had contributed very little financially during the marriage. According to him, Daniel had carried the family almost entirely on his own. Every sentence ignored the years I'd spent helping build the foundation beneath his success. When it was Daniel's turn, he stood confidently. "I've always tried to be fair," he said. "Emily lived comfortably because of my work. I don't believe she deserves anything beyond what's already been offered." His words echoed through the silent courtroom. Then he looked directly at me. "You'll never touch my money again." The woman beside him couldn't hide her smile. She leaned closer and whispered something that made him laugh quietly. My attorney remained perfectly still. She waited until the courtroom became silent again before standing. "Your Honor," she said, "the petitioner would like to submit several financial exhibits documenting the movement of marital assets during the final 18 months of the marriage." Boxes of organized records were placed before the judge. Bank statements, investment transfers, property documents, email records. Daniel's smile faded slightly. His attorney flipped through the first binder with growing concern. Still, Daniel crossed his arms confidently. He believed we'd found only part of the truth. He had no idea what came next. My attorney reached into her briefcase and removed a sealed, white envelope. She walked slowly toward the bench. "Your Honor," she said respectfully, before reviewing the remaining evidence, "my client asks that you read this personal letter." The judge accepted the envelope. He adjusted his glasses, opened the seal. The courtroom became so quiet I could hear someone turning a page in the gallery. He read the first paragraph, then the second. Suddenly, he stopped. His eyebrows lifted. A faint smile appeared across his face. He slowly looked over the top of the letter, directly at Daniel. Then he quietly said, "Well, Mr. Carter, this changes everything." No one spoke. The judge lowered the letter onto the bench and looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Carter," he said calmly, "your attorney has argued that your wife made little financial contribution to this marriage and that your handling of marital assets has been completely transparent." Daniel nodded confidently. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge picked up the letter again. "Your wife's letter doesn't ask for sympathy. It simply explains how each financial document connects to the next. More importantly, it identifies several transactions your sworn testimony failed to mention." The confidence disappeared from Daniel's face. My attorney stood and handed another binder to the judge. Inside was a simple timeline. Every transfer, every hidden account, every property payment, every email, every date matched perfectly. The judge turned several pages in silence before looking back at Daniel. "Can you explain why substantial funds were transferred from joint marital accounts into accounts that were never disclosed during these proceedings?" Daniel glanced at his attorney. His attorney avoided eye contact. "They were business expenses," Daniel answered. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Business expenses connected to a condominium purchased for someone who is not your spouse?" The courtroom fell silent again. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I can explain." "I'm listening," the judge replied. Nothing came. Across the aisle, the woman who had entered the courtroom, wearing a confident smile, suddenly looked at the floor. She no longer looked certain she belonged there. The judge continued reading. "According to these records, your wife didn't discover isolated mistakes. She uncovered a deliberate pattern extending over many months." He carefully closed the binder. Mrs. Carter remained respectful throughout these proceedings. She allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Then he turned toward me. "That was a wise decision. For the first time all morning, I felt myself breathe normally. Not because I had won, because the truth no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to the courtroom." Daniel shifted uneasily in his chair. The arrogance that had filled the hallway only an hour earlier had completely disappeared. The judge made several notes before looking toward both attorneys. "Based on the evidence presented today, this court will require additional financial findings before entering a final judgment." He paused. "And if these records are verified, the concealment of marital assets will significantly affect this court's decision regarding property division." Daniel's face turned completely pale. For the first time since our marriage began falling apart, he finally understood that his own lies, not my letter, had placed everything he valued at risk. The final hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. After reviewing the completed financial investigation, the judge announced his decision. Daniel's hidden transfers, undisclosed accounts, and attempts to reduce the marital estate had all been verified. Every document my attorney submitted had been supported by independent financial records. The judge ordered that the concealed assets be included in the marital estate and adjusted the property division accordingly. Daniel didn't lose because I embarrassed him. He lost because the truth finally caught up with him. When the hearing ended, he stood frozen beside his attorney. The woman who had smiled so confidently during the first hearing quietly walked toward the exit without saying a single word. Neither of them looked back. I signed the final paperwork, thanked my attorney, and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt light. Not because I had won a legal battle, because I no longer had to carry someone else's lies. The months that followed weren't perfect. I sold the house that held too many painful memories and moved into a small lakeside apartment that finally felt peaceful. I returned to work full-time, reconnected with old friends, and slowly began building a life that belonged entirely to me. One quiet evening, while unpacking another moving box, I found a framed photograph from our wedding day. I smiled gently, not because I missed the marriage, but because I finally understood something. The woman in that picture had spent years believing love meant endless sacrifice. The woman holding the photograph now knew something far more valuable. Self-respect is stronger than blind loyalty. Trust should never require you to ignore the truth. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't watching someone else fall. It's walking away with your integrity still intact. If this story touched you, let me know what you would have done in Emily's place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories about betrayal, resilience, and justice. Your next unforgettable story is just one video away.